My name is Elijah Mensah, and I'm a trauma surgeon with a practice that spans from the heart of West Philadelphia to the dusty roads of Ghana. At first glance, you might think my life is nothing but success stories and lives saved. And yes, that's partly true. But you know, even the steadiest hands carry scars. And the story I'm about to tell you is about those scars, the ones that have shaped every decision I've made, every patient I've fought for, even to this day. When I was 16, my parents brought me to a crumbling community clinic on Germantown Avenue, dropping me off in front of the weathered brick building like I was a package they needed to return. I stood frozen on the cracked sidewalk, clutching the worn duffel bag my mother had shoved into my hands that morning. The biting February cold seeped through every layer of my clothes, carrying with it the smell of exhaust fumes and the distant scent of fried food from the corner store. My parents rang the clinic's buzzer a few times, spoke briefly to someone through the intercom, then turned and walked back to their car as swiftly as if they were just running an errand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Their silver Honda pulled away from the curb, never once looking back. Their final words were brief and hollow. "We need time to settle some things, Elijah. Dr. Morales will take good care of you." I believed them, but a small voice inside me whispered, "They're not coming back, are they?" A moment later, the heavy glass door swung open. Dr. Linda Morales stood there, shorter than I'd expected, her graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her rough hands gestured me inside, with an efficiency that felt more like a business transaction than a rescue. "Come on, kid," she said, her voice low and gravelly, laced with a Puerto Rican accent that made even harsh words sound musical. "Standing out there won't change anything." I quietly dragged my bag across the threshold, my heart heavy with confusion. The small clinic was steeped in the smell of antiseptic and thyme, mixed with the bitter aroma of old coffee and the faint scent of cleaning supplies. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow. She showed me to a supply closet that had been hastily converted into a makeshift bedroom, where a cot sat wedged between shelves of medical supplies and a small window that looked out onto an alley. That night, I lay awake, staring at boxes of gauze and syringes, trying to conjure my parents' faces in the darkness. "They'll come back tomorrow, won't they?" But all that answered me was the distant sound of sirens and the occasional footsteps in the hallway, cold and unfamiliar. In the days that followed, I lived like a ghost. I spoke little, smiled even less, and answered Dr. Morales with curt, clipped words. But she never pushed me. She just handed me a mop and pointed toward the waiting room. "Work makes you stronger," she said, her eyes stern yet strangely warm. "And right now, you need to be strong." 3 months into my new life at the clinic, I had settled into a routine that felt more like survival than living. Each morning, I woke before dawn in my converted supply closet, the smell of disinfectant my alarm clock. Dr. Morales would already be bustling around the clinic, her coffee maker gurgling in the tiny break room while she reviewed patient charts. I'd emerge quietly, grab the mop bucket, and begin cleaning the waiting room, while she pretended not to watch me from the corner of her eye. My days blurred together in a rhythm of mopping, restocking, and organizing supplies. But in the evenings, when the last patient had gone home and Dr. Morales was finishing her paperwork, I discovered something that changed everything. Hidden behind boxes of expired medications in the storage room were stacks of discarded medical textbooks, their pages yellowed, but their knowledge still intact. I started small, flipping through anatomy diagrams while sitting on my cot. The human body unfolded before me like a map to a country I'd never visited, but desperately wanted to understand. I memorized the names of bones, the pathways of arteries, the intricate dance of muscles and tendons. When sleep wouldn't come, I'd trace the diagrams with my finger, whispering Latin terms into the darkness. One night, Dr. Morales caught me. I'd been so absorbed in a chapter about cardiac rhythms that I hadn't heard her footsteps in the hallway. She stood in my doorway, arms crossed, studying me with those sharp brown eyes that seemed to see straight through people's defenses. "How long have you been reading those?" she asked, her voice neutral. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I'm sorry. I know they were probably thrown out for a reason, but I was just—" "Answer the question, Elijah." "Every night for the past month," I admitted, expecting her to take the books away. Instead, she stepped into the room and picked up the anatomy text I'd been reading. She flipped to a random page, pointed to a diagram of the heart, and said, "Tell me what this is." I swallowed hard. "The left ventricle. It pumps oxygenated blood through the aortic valve into the aorta, which distributes it throughout the body." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "And this?" "The tricuspid valve. It prevents blood from flowing backward from the right ventricle into the right atrium during systole." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she closed the book and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Tomorrow, you start helping me restock the medical supplies. Real supplies, not just cleaning materials. And I want you to observe during patient consultations." My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Dr. Morales, "Don't thank me yet," she interrupted, but her voice had softened. "This isn't charity, kid. If you're going to live here, you might as well learn something useful. But understand this. I won't coddle you. You make mistakes, you learn from them. You don't understand something, you ask questions. And you never, ever stop working." I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. The next morning, she handed me a small notebook and a pen. "Start keeping track of what you see," she said. "Every patient, every symptom, every treatment. Medicine isn't just about memorizing textbooks. It's about patterns, connections, and instincts." For the first time since my parents had driven away, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt purpose beginning to take root in the hollow space they'd left behind. 4 years had passed since that February morning when my parents drove away. I was 20 now, splitting my time between pre-med classes at Temple University and late shifts at the clinic. Dr. Morales had become more than my mentor. She was the steady presence that anchored my world, even when I couldn't bring myself to call her family. It was a Tuesday in March when everything changed. I was restocking IV bags when I heard the crash from the examination room. The sound of metal instruments hitting the floor, followed by a heavy thud that made my blood run cold. I dropped everything and ran. Dr. Morales lay crumpled beside the examination table, her face pale and her breathing shallow. A middle-aged woman with diabetes sat frozen in the chair, staring in shock. I dropped to my knees, checking her pulse while dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "Stay with me," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Please, stay with me." The ambulance ride to Temple University Hospital felt like an eternity. I held her hand as paramedics worked around us, her skin cold and papery beneath my fingers. She was conscious, but weak, her eyes finding mine with a clarity that scared me more than her collapse had. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the siren, "there's something I need to tell you." "Save your strength," I said, squeezing her hand. "You're going to be fine." But she wasn't fine. The doctors found what they'd missed in her annual checkups: pancreatic cancer, advanced and aggressive. 3 weeks, they said, maybe a month if we were lucky. During those final weeks, she told me things she'd never shared before. How she'd been the chief of emergency medicine at Jefferson before a malpractice lawsuit destroyed her career. How she'd been made the scapegoat for a system failure that cost a young father his life. How she'd opened the clinic not out of charity, but out of penance. "They couldn't take my knowledge," she said one afternoon, her voice hoarse but fierce. "They couldn't take my hands or my heart. Remember that, Elijah. Systems will try to break you, but they can't take what's inside unless you let them." She gave me a small brass key on her last coherent day. "My office," she said. "Everything you need is in the desk drawer. The reference letter, the scholarship applications, all of it. I wrote them before I got sick." I stared at the key, my vision blurring. "Dr. Morales, I can't." "You can and you will," she said with the same stern authority she'd used when I was 16 and grieving. but promise me something. Don't lose yourself chasing success. Don't become so focused on fixing others that you forget to heal yourself." She died on a quiet Thursday morning while I held her hand and read aloud from one of those old anatomy textbooks we'd studied together. No family came to claim her body. No colleagues from her former life attended the funeral. It was just me, a handful of clinic patients, and the weight of losing the only parent who'd ever chosen to stay. Standing at her graveside, I made a promise that would shape the next decade of my life. I would become the doctor she'd seen in me, but I would do it carrying her memory, not running from my pain. Medical school at Jefferson became my monastery, and I its most devoted monk. The irony wasn't lost on me. Studying at the same institution where Dr. Morales had once been chief, where her career had been destroyed. But her reference letter and the scholarship fund she'd quietly established in my name opened doors I never thought I'd walk through. The years blurred together in a haze of lectures, labs, and sleepless rotations. While my classmates formed study groups and friendships, I remained on the periphery, polite but distant. I had learned early that getting too close to people meant risking the pain of being left behind. It was easier to excel alone than to depend on others who might disappear. My professors praised my technical skills and diagnostic instincts, but I could see the concern in their eyes when they watched me with patience. I was competent, thorough, even brilliant at times, but I was missing something they couldn't quite name: the human connection that separates good doctors from great healers. It was during my trauma surgery rotation that I met Carmen Rodriguez, a nurse practitioner whose reputation preceded her. She was known for her sharp mind, steady hands, and the way she could calm the most agitated patients with just her presence. What I didn't expect was how easily she would see through the walls I'd spent years perfecting. Our first real conversation happened during a particularly brutal overnight shift. A 7-year-old boy had been brought in after a hit and run, and while we'd managed to save his life, the surgery had taken 8 hours. I was sitting in the break room afterward, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, when Carmen slumped into the chair across from me. "Hell of a night," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The boy's face kept flashing in my mind, the same age I'd been when I first understood that parents could disappear without warning. "You did good in there," she continued. "Your hands never shook, not once. But afterward," she paused, studying my face, "you looked like you were seeing ghosts." "We all have ghosts," I said finally. "Maybe, but most of us don't carry them into every room we enter." Quote. Something about her directness, her refusal to accept my practiced deflection, cracked something open inside me. Over the following months, our late-night coffee conversations became a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. Carmen had lost her younger brother to gun violence when she was 19, and she understood the particular weight of survivor's guilt, the way trauma could both fuel and consume you. "You know what your problem is?" she said one night as we sat in the hospital cafeteria after losing a patient. "You think caring means getting hurt, but not caring hurts worse. It just hurts different." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was right, of course. I'd become so good at protecting myself from abandonment that I'd forgotten how to let people in. But Carmen was patient, persistent in the way that only true friends can be. She didn't push for more than I could give, but she never let me retreat completely into isolation either. Slowly, carefully, I began to remember what it felt like to trust someone enough to show them my scars. By 36, I had everything I'd dreamed of during those lonely nights in the clinic supply closet. I was chief of trauma surgery at Temple University Hospital, splitting my time between the main facility and the community clinic I'd helped expand in Dr. Morales' memory. My hands had saved hundreds of lives, my mentorship had guided dozens of medical students, and my name appeared on research papers that would outlive me. What I didn't have was peace. That remained as elusive as it had been 20 years ago. It was a Thursday afternoon in October when my carefully constructed world collided with the ghosts I'd spent 2 decades avoiding. I was reviewing surgical schedules when my pager buzzed with an emergency cardiac consult. Nothing unusual, until I walked into room 314 and saw the face that had haunted my dreams for 20 years. Paul Mensah lay in the hospital bed, his dark skin now ashen, oxygen cannula tucked beneath his nose. Age had carved deep lines around his eyes, and his once proud shoulders sagged against the pillows. But it was unmistakably him, the man who had driven away that February morning without looking back. For a moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, my clipboard trembling in my hands. 20 years of medical training, of life-or-death decisions made in split seconds, and I was suddenly 16 again, watching their silver Honda disappear around the corner. Elijah? The voice came from behind me. I turned to see Naomi Mensah rising from the visitor's chair, her hair now silver, but her eyes still sharp with the calculating intelligence I remembered. She was dressed well. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, success written in every carefully chosen detail. "My God," she whispered, pressing her hand to her chest in a gesture that might have been genuine if I didn't know better. "Look at you. You became exactly what we always knew you could be." The casual use of "we" hit me like a physical blow. As if they'd been watching from afar, proud parents following their sons' achievements. As if they hadn't left me with nothing but a duffel bag and a lifetime of questions. "Dr. Mensah," I said, my voice steady, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I'd learned long ago to retreat into professionalism when emotions threatened to overwhelm me. "I'm here to evaluate Mr. Mensah's cardiac status." Paul's eyes fluttered open at the sound of my voice. He stared at me for a long moment, and I searched his face for some sign of recognition, of regret, of anything that might explain why they'd abandoned their only child. But his expression remained blank, almost annoyed, as if I were just another inconvenience in his day. "The pain in my chest," he said finally, his voice weak but demanding. "They say it's my heart. I need the best surgeon available." I almost laughed at the bitter irony. He was asking me to save the organ he'd never used to love me. "I'll review your chart and imaging," I said, stepping toward the bed with practiced composure. "We'll determine the best course of treatment." Naomi moved closer, her perfume filling the space between us. "Elijah, we have so much to catch up on. Perhaps we could talk privately? There's so much you don't understand about why we—" "I need to focus on the patient right now," I interrupted. "My doctor's training the only thing keeping me upright." The cardiac catheterization revealed what I'd suspected from the moment I saw Paul's gray complexion, severe coronary artery disease with multiple blockages. His heart was failing, damaged by years of untreated hypertension and what appeared to be a lifetime of stress. He needed immediate intervention, possibly bypass surgery, and even then his prognosis was guarded at best. I stood in the hallway outside his room, staring at his chart while my hands refused to stop trembling. 20 years of medical training had taught me to compartmentalize, to separate the personal from the professional, but every technique I'd mastered seemed useless against the tsunami of emotions threatening to drown me. "Elijah?" I looked up to find Carmen approaching, her expression concerned. She'd been watching me since I'd emerged from the room, and I could see the questions forming behind her eyes. "The cardiac consult," she said carefully. "How did it go?" "Standard case," I lied, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Severe CAD, probable candidate for surgical intervention." Carmen studied my face with the perceptive gaze that had become both comfort and curse over the years. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of her words almost broke me. "Something like that." She waited, understanding that pushing me would only make me retreat further. It was one of the things I valued most about our friendship. Carmen knew when to speak and when to simply be present. "It's my father," I said finally, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "The patient, Paul Mensah, the man who dropped me off at Dr. Morales' clinic 20 years ago and never looked back." Carmen's eyes widened, but she didn't gasp or offer empty platitudes. She simply reached out and placed her hand on my arm, grounding me in the present moment. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Treat him," I said without hesitation. "He's a patient. That's all he is." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. He wasn't just a patient. He was the man whose abandonment had shaped every relationship I'd ever attempted, every wall I'd built, every sleepless night I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong to deserve being left behind. That evening, I sat across from Paul and Naomi in the family conference room, explaining his condition with the same clinical detachment I used with every family. Naomi hung on every word, asking questions about prognosis and treatment options with an intensity that felt more like a business negotiation than concern for her husband's life. Paul, meanwhile, stared out the window as if the conversation bored him. When I finished explaining the surgical options, he finally looked at me with those same cold eyes I remembered from childhood. "You're recommending the surgery?" he asked. "I'm presenting you with options," I replied. "The decision is yours." "Then I want you to do it," he said matter-of-factly. "You're supposed to be the best, aren't you?" The casual dismissal in his tone, the complete absence of recognition for who I was to him, hit me harder than any scream or argument could have. He was asking me to save his life while treating me like a stranger. 3 days after agreeing to perform Paul's surgery, I was called to the emergency department for a trauma case that would change everything. The paramedics brought in a 14-year-old boy with a gunshot wound to the shoulder, his dark eyes wide with shock and defiance. Blood soaked through his hoodie, but what caught my attention wasn't the injury. It was the sketch pad he refused to let go of, even as we wheeled him into the trauma bay. "What's your name?" I asked as we prepped him for surgery. "Jabari," he said through gritted teeth, his voice carrying the same guarded tone I recognized from my own adolescence. "And I ain't telling you nothing else." The surgery was routine. The bullet had missed major arteries and organs, but something about this kid stayed with me. Maybe it was the way he clutched that sketch pad, or the fact that, when the social worker arrived, she mentioned he was bouncing between foster homes. Maybe it was the way he reminded me of myself at that age, angry and alone and convinced the world was against him. The next morning I found him in his hospital room, sketching furiously despite his bandaged shoulder. I knocked on the doorframe, and he looked up with those suspicious eyes that had probably seen too much for 14 years. "How's the pain?" I asked, stepping into the room. "Fine," he lied, the same way I used to lie to Dr. Morales when she asked if I was okay. I moved closer and glanced at his sketch pad. My breath caught in my throat. He'd drawn a perfect anatomical diagram of a human heart, complete with labeled chambers and vessels. The detail was extraordinary, the proportions exact. "Where did you learn to draw like that?" I asked. Jabari shrugged, but I caught a flicker of pride in his expression. "Library books. Ain't much else to do when you're waiting for your next placement. You interested in medicine?" "Maybe," he said, his defenses still up. "Why? You going to tell me I can be whatever I want if I just believe in myself?" The sarcasm in his voice was sharp enough to cut. I pulled up a chair and sat down, remembering how Dr. Morales had never talked down to me or offered empty encouragement. "No," I said. "I'm going to tell you that medicine is hard work, and most people don't have the patience for it. But if you're serious about learning, I might know a place where you could start." Over the next few days, as Jabari recovered, I found myself stopping by his room more often than medical necessity required. He peppered me with questions about anatomy, about surgical procedures, about what it really took to become a doctor. His hunger for knowledge reminded me so much of my younger self that it was both painful and inspiring. When his discharge day arrived, I made him an offer. "There's a community clinic not far from here. They could use someone to help with basic tasks, filing, organizing supplies, that sort of thing. Interested?" Jabari studied me with those old beyond their years eyes. "What's the catch?" "No catch," I said. "Just work hard, ask questions, and don't give up on yourself." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw hope flicker in his expression. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after Paul's successful bypass surgery. I found it slipped under my office door, the envelope bearing unfamiliar handwriting and a postmark from Accra, Ghana. My hands trembled as I opened it, wondering if this was another ghost from my past come to haunt me. Dear Dr. Elijah Mensah, my name is Reverend Kojo Mensah, and I believe I am your uncle, your father Paul's younger brother. I have spent many years searching for you, and through the grace of God and the modern miracle of the Internet, I have discovered that you have become a healer, just as our grandfather was before us. I write to you not to burden you with more family complications, but to share something I believe you should know. Your grandfather, Kwame Mensah, built a clinic in our village of Atwima before he passed. It has fallen into disrepair, but the foundation remains strong, just as his legacy does. I have maintained the old family land, waiting for someone worthy to continue what he started. I know that Paul left you when you were young. This was his great shame, though he has never admitted it. Our family carries wounds that have been passed down like heirlooms, and I fear Paul repeated the patterns of abandonment that our own father showed us. But you, my nephew, have chosen to heal rather than wound. That gives me hope. If you are willing, I would like to meet you. There are stories about your grandfather that might help you understand where your gift for healing comes from. There are also ways we might honor his memory together, if your heart leads you in that direction. With respect and anticipation, Reverend Kojo Mensah. I read the letter 3 times, each word settling into my bones, like medicine. Here was family I'd never known existed, reaching across an ocean to offer connection instead of demand it. The contrast with Paul and Naomi's reappearance couldn't have been starker. That evening, I found Carmen in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a salad while reviewing patient charts. I slid into the seat across from her and placed the letter on the table between us. "Read this," I said. Carmen set down her fork and read carefully, her expression growing more thoughtful with each paragraph. When she finished, she looked up at me with something I rarely saw in her eyes: excitement. "Elijah, this is incredible," she said. "A grandfather who was a healer? A clinic waiting to be rebuilt? This is your legacy, not the abandonment." "I don't know," I said, though part of me was already imagining what it might be like to see where I'd come from. What if it's just another disappointment? What if he's just like them? Carmen reached across the table and took my hand. What if he's not? What if this is exactly what you've been searching for without knowing it? I thought about Jabari, now 3 weeks into his work at the clinic, his sketchpad filled with increasingly sophisticated anatomical drawings. I thought about the kids who came through our emergency department every day, abandoned by systems, by families, by hope itself. "You think I should go?" I asked. "I think you owe it to yourself to find out where you really come from," Carmen said. "Not the story of abandonment that's defined you, but the story of healing that chose you." That night, I wrote my first letter to Reverend Kojo Mensah, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. The red earth of Ghana felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. Reverend Kojo Mensah met me at Kotoka International Airport, and I recognized him immediately, not from photographs, but from the gentle strength in his eyes that reminded me of Dr. Morales. He was tall like Paul, but where my father carried himself with rigid control, Kojo moved with the easy grace of a man at peace with himself. "Elijah," he said, embracing me warmly, "you have your grandfather's hands, long fingers, steady grip, perfect for healing." The drive to Atwima took us through bustling markets and quiet villages, past children playing soccer in dusty fields, and women carrying water jugs balanced perfectly on their heads. Kojo spoke softly as we drove, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories that painted a picture of a family I'd never known existed. "Your grandfather Kwame was beloved here," he said as we turned onto a dirt road lined with palm trees. "They called him Osajefo, the healer who fights for the people. He treated everyone, rich or poor, and never turned anyone away." When we reached the family compound, my breath caught in my throat. The main house was modest, but well-maintained, its white walls bright against the green landscape. But it was the ruined building behind it that drew my attention. Crumbling concrete walls with empty window frames that still somehow managed to look hopeful rather than desolate. "The clinic," Kojo said, following my gaze. "Come, let me show you." We walked through what had once been examination rooms. Kojo, pointing out where equipment had stood, where my grandfather had performed minor surgeries, where he'd taught village healers about modern medicine while learning from their traditional knowledge. He dreamed of a place where healing could bridge the old and the new, Kojo explained, where children could learn both the wisdom of their ancestors and the innovations of modern medicine. In what had been the main treatment room, Kojo stopped and placed his hand on a concrete pillar that had somehow remained intact. "Your grandfather carved something here," he said. "Look." I moved closer and saw words etched into the concrete in English. "Healing is not just medicine, it is love made visible." The words hit me like a physical blow. For 20 years, I'd been an excellent surgeon, a competent doctor, but I'd forgotten the love part. I'd been so focused on technical perfection, on proving I was worthy, that I'd lost sight of what Dr. Morales had tried to teach me about true healing. Paul struggled with this place, Kojo continued quietly. The responsibility felt too heavy for him. He wanted to make his mark in the world beyond these walls, to prove he was more than his father's son. But in running from legacy, he lost himself. I thought about Paul lying in his hospital bed, treating me like a stranger. I thought about Naomi's calculating eyes, always looking for an angle. I thought about the 16-year-old boy they'd abandoned, and suddenly I understood something I'd never seen before. "They were afraid," I said aloud, the realization washing over me like warm rain. "Fear makes us do terrible things to the people we love most," Kojo agreed. "But you, Elijah, you chose differently. You chose to heal instead of wound." Standing in those ruins, surrounded by the ghosts of healers who'd come before me, I felt something shift inside my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from my past or trying to prove myself worthy of love. I was simply home. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of the newly opened Elijah Mensah Healing Center, watching Jabari explain cardiac anatomy to a group of high school students. At 18 now, he moved with the confidence of someone who'd found his purpose. His acceptance letter to Temple University's pre-med program was framed on my office wall, next to a photo of Dr. Morales and a piece of concrete for my grandfather's clinic in Ghana. The center occupied 3 floors of a renovated building in West Philadelphia, serving the same community where I'd once mopped floors and dreamed of becoming something more. But this wasn't just about medicine. It was about creating the kind of family that chooses you, that stays when life gets difficult, that sees potential instead of problems. Dr. Mensah called Maria Santos, one of our newest residents. "Mrs. Patterson is asking for you specifically. She says you're the only doctor who listens to her whole story, not just her symptoms." I smiled, remembering Dr. Morales' words about healing being love made visible. It had taken me 20 years to understand what she meant, but now I lived it every day. Carmen appeared beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd just finished a successful community health fair. 63 families today, she said, handing me a cup. Jabari convinced 5 more kids to apply for our summer internship program. "He's got your gift for seeing potential," I said, watching him demonstrate proper hand-washing technique to a group of 12-year-olds. "No," Carmen corrected gently. "He's got yours. You just finally learned to use it." Quote. Through the window, I could see construction crews working on the foundation of the new Kwame Mensah Clinic across the street, our satellite facility that would offer free pediatric care and mentorship programs. In 6 months, I'd be spending part of each year in Ghana, working with Reverend Kojo to rebuild my grandfather's clinic and train local healers. Paul had died 3 months after his surgery, his heart finally giving out, despite our medical intervention. Naomi attended the funeral but didn't speak to me, perhaps finally understanding that some relationships can't be bought or manipulated back into existence. I felt sadness for the father he could have been, but I no longer carried his abandonment as my identity. Instead, I carried Dr. Morales' stethoscope in my white coat pocket and my grandfather's words carved into my heart. I carried the responsibility of showing kids like Jabari that their circumstances don't define their possibilities. I carried the knowledge that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about creating something beautiful from the pieces. That evening, I visited Dr. Morales' grave for the first time since her funeral. I placed a letter against her headstone, weighted down with a small stone from Ghana. I kept going, I whispered to the quiet cemetery. I learned to heal myself, too. Thank you for showing me that abandoned doesn't mean unwanted, and that the family that chooses you is sometimes stronger than the one that doesn't. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could swear I heard her voice. Well done, kid, well done. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.